very proud to propose today because we're going to solve a major problem in today's society, right? We think in a lot of high crime areas, like the banlieue in Paris, like a lot of minority areas in New York, there is such a high crime and police is ineffective to actually handle this. We think we should take every tool which is available, the best tools available to actually act on this problem, because today's police is just unable to do this, right? I'm going to talk about three things. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the policy we actually incline and what we do give this vigilantes and what the role of the police will stay in as well. I will talk more about why these vigilantes have a stronger incentive to overcome the problems that there are now and why they are more capable because they have more knowledge. And I will talk a little bit more about why we think this is a legitimate actor and why in the current state, politicians do not have enough incentive to actually solve the problem. Okay. So first, the policy, right? We think the vigilantes will act as helpers of the police, right? We think the police will always still be there. The police will, in the end, be the person that's determined if someone should go to jail or not, right? We think the vigilantes, which we will give weapons, the weapons we will give are not lethal weapons, right? We give them weapons that are making people incapable to do stuff, right? So we will give them stun guns and maybe pepper spray and stuff like that, but nothing lethal. And what kind of groups we will give that? We will give it to groups which are from that region where problems are, right? So we think they should match the racial profile of the area, they should match the cultural profile of the area. I think this is most important. Please sit down. We think we allow these people to use these guns now, or these stun guns now, because we think they give the police more opportunity to do their job better, right? We think we allow these people to use stun guns to, if they see or report some crime that is going on, and we enable them to actually bring the criminals to the police, and that will decide if they are going to jail or not, right? We think they should still be able to provide clear evidence, like report of eyewitnesses or camera, stuff like that, if there's something going on. And we still think that these people are always under law in themselves, right? And if they do something that they abuse their power, we also will found out. Second half. This is really different, because in the status quo actually people can only use this as a defensive mechanism to actually defend their own safety, and we will enable these people to actually act out and see. They will act as a patrol system, and they will see. We think there will be crimes going on, and they can actually use these weapons to prevent crime like that. And we think they get some authority because they are now patrol systems, and people will respect them for that because they are allowed to do this. And we point out the specific groups which are actually giving this role, and we think it's pretty clear, right? So enough about the policy. Sure. Now please see that. Then why we think these vigilantes fit this role best, right? We think firstly they have a really much stronger incentive to work better, right? Because they know the areas, they know the problems that are best, and they know what kind of culture is there, right? They know, for example, that many times there are a more masculine culture, a culture in which pride is really important, and now a lot of people think, yeah, the police are telling us what to do, right? And they just don't like that, because they just have a natural kind of empathy against authority figures. And I think if we actually put people there that they know, that they feel like, oh, these are brothers of me, they will be more respectful, they will be more involved, right? Please sit down. We think these people will be more respected, but they also will know more about the area, more about the group, right? And therefore they will be more effective in what they do, because in the status quo we see that the police are sometimes even afraid of certain areas, right? If they go there along with a group of 5 people, they see sometimes they get overthrown by groups of 15 or 20 people, and they just don't feel safe anymore. And sometimes they think, well, maybe we just should not go to these areas altogether anymore. I think this is really harmful, because the state should always try to protect everyone, right? And we are not giving away the burden of the state to protect anyone. We only say the state should enable and make use of the tools they can help if needed, right? And we see the police are ineffective because people are not listening to them, they're not respecting enough. And we think enabling this patrol system, which we make clear that people have to listen to, otherwise they can make use of these stun guns and stuff like that. This brings us and helps us to the first half.
Okay, is this an ideal long-term setup and solution, or is this a stopgap measure until things get better?
Well, we think we started in the short run, right? And if it really works, of course, these people can actually, in the long run, maybe believe that the system of the police work, right? And maybe they gain respect of the police, and we see the police will get more differentiated and also has more control of the areas, right? But we think maybe it's impossible to do that, and if it's impossible, it will also this system works in the long run. So we don't really care if in the long run these people will actually all believe in the police system, or they still want to have these just more informal kind of border control in the area. What we believe is important is actually solving this crime, and we think this is more helpful. Okay, and then the fourth one: why are these people legitimate, and why are they more effective? And we think I already explained to you that people are probably more likely to listen to this and don't think they are enchanted enough. And we think in these areas there's now a narrative that that the police is a law authority and has the interest of other areas of other people more than the minority groups, right? A lot of people think the police are actually acting in the interest of a lot of the rich people, right? And we see that actually kind of is true sometimes, right? They act to protect the rich houses, they act to protect the more expensive cars, and we think these people have sometimes the reason to be kind of skeptical of the police. And we think actually to bring them involved, to involve them in the law system, they see that actually we have the best kind of effort for everyone, and we want to include these people in the protecting society, and then we want to make them feel more responsible for each other and look out for them and each other. And we think actually helping them to enable this respect, to give them some kind of weapon to actually gain this respect, enables them to do so, right? And because we think politicians now lack sometimes the incentives, because these areas don't vote enough, and actually the police are still, politicians are still serving interests of other groups more, it will not happen without this system. So because we're solving a problem, because we make an effective policy, and vigilantes are stronger and better known actors to do this, please propose. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, when you as an individual feel that the actual state has failed, that legitimacy and your ideal to enact justice within your own mindset, your own personal identification of what justice is to you, permeates us as individuals, and then we enact that justice. It's a legitimacy that we cannot actually withdraw from at any state, at any point, and that's what we are or the main idea of contention that we want to bring today. I'm going to talk about three main ideals. One, why this is incapable in its own nature of actually being a stopgap sort of measure. Why it cannot be shut off at any given point, and that's why that's an idea that we should try to back away from, probably. Number two, practically how this will legitimately happen within society, something that we should probably deal with. And number three, how violence, more particularly the idea of violence, makes more accessible to the individual, something that we want to avoid. I want to talk, first off, go just a few main points of rebuttal, just to start my case. Number one, given the actual existing judicial and police infrastructure, with all of these areas, perhaps the better option in our case would actually be funnel this quote-unquote support into, I don't know, maybe perhaps enhancing and dealing with properly the current infrastructure and the current police system. If we have all these notions of support, why don't we try to fix the actual problem that we're dealt with, as opposed to just brushing it under the table and dealing with it in a vigilantism method. Number two, major flaw in their case. What are the actual checks and balances on these executions of justice? There is a check within society on the police. It's the state. It is their actual notions, which stems from society. Individuals do not operate under those checks. Major flaw in their case, we would like to hear more about that. Third thing, the idea as quote-unquote, states should actually make use of all available tools. Again, an argument just for added in to the police and the current existing framework of the state apparatus, which we have. I want to go on to my first main idea, the idea of incapable of being a stopgap. It was asked in a point of information, and he sort of just dismissed the issue, is this long-term or is it short-term? Assumingly this is going to be short-term, because logically, once we fix the problem, we don't really need to have it anymore. But what we want to say is more term implications is really impossible to sort of achieve under their model. Well, like, you cannot denigrate the justice system to a certain degree. You more or less make the justice system as a sort of opt-out system, right? Whereas like the state is now not necessarily the monopoly of power, see Hobbes, like the idea that like the state actually cannot be that one single arbiter of justice. A very, very problematic system when individuals do not personally feel that justice was done. Like, legitimacy is currently difficult enough to try to establish no thank you under the current framework. Now, different justifications for what is legitimate, individual definitions of what is legitimate justice will actually permeate the system. It's literally not like one, like we don't have one universal definition, whereas you're a criminal, we all sort of collectively agreed that you should die by our vigilante hand. No, no thank you. Moreover, what does this actually lead to? Justice is slow for a reason, ladies and gentlemen. We have courts, we have appellate courts, we have supreme courts. Like within this current framework, there's actually EU courts. Like trials and retrials guarantee that we got the sentence right the first time. That we want to continuously ask because we don't want to be put in a situation where we actually stem people and just throw them to the wolves. That would be society in these cases. No thank you. I'll get to you at the end of the point. Often, individuals do not feel retribution. This is the personality factor that we actually cannot go away from on our side of the case. Increasingly, individuals feel that A, justice has not been done when a criminal is only locked up for a certain amount of time, or by the nature that they were locked up, or even worse, that they just got away with the crime to begin with. Individuals increasingly do not feel retribution was done. So if they feel that on a personal level, they will then go forward and out of their way to enact justice, which is literally just arming themselves with a bat and meeting the person in an alley so that they can get what they deserve. What we want to say, the larger idea, what this leads to, and why this permeates our system and destabilizes our legitimate social justice framework, is when you feel that the state has failed, this legitimacy permeates our minds to a certain degree, which we cannot denigrate from, which we cannot actually upset, and not get to a point where we cannot undo it within society. I'll take, yeah, clothing.
When we talk about Paris, we tried all of that, what you said, all your nice ideas. We love the police and we love the judicial system. How will the Paris banlieues change under your alternative? Show us an alternative.
Currently funding all of the state apparatus, as we told you in our rebuttal, trying to fund it into a more applicable police system. Number one main point of contention, if we do have people within society that want to enact justice, we should probably train them to police. We should enact a system of checks and balances on them so that they don't just arbitrarily go around killing people and get away with it because, well, I'm a vigilante, so it's okay. That's something that we don't actually want to go, that we don't actually think is legitimate. No. My second point. Practically, within society, let's examine this. Before we go on to larger philosophical framework, how will this actually happen within society? Number one, armed individuals. We can't actually break that ideal in our mind. Given the power for taking justice into their own hand and into their own mind, if you're holding a gun or a bat or something, you actually as an individual feel more empowered. You feel like, I am justice, therefore I have a legitimate aim in enacting it, and therefore I am right in enacting it. However, this stops at every one of those checks. That does not necessarily dictate it is a legitimate action. Number two, let's talk about high crime areas are typically divided based on race and class. Hypothetical situation, I consider someone, this is not me personally again, but hypothetical situation, if I were to consider someone who is, say, on welfare as not just using the apparatus of the state and trying to better his life, more if I define him as stealing from me and stealing from society, I can actually enact justice onto that thief of society. There are different definitions of justice that we actually deal with. And when we actually bold all these things into one single monopoly of state power, then it can holistically deal with that on a better level. Also, for example, in direct rebuttal to when they talk about vigilantes, well, they know the problem best because they're from those areas. Yeah, example of high crime areas where seemingly closed off and locked communities, where grudges increasingly happen. Grudges will permeate the system as well. You want to kill that person because they actually attacked your sister or something. As opposed to the state, which is sort of has a backup stance, a more nuanced stance, and something that can actually deal with this change overall. Third point, real quick, the idea of violence, and the ideal of violence is now more accessible to the individual. Given the notion towards that individuals this is seeming a legitimate action. What we want to say is specifically it divides the justice system across multiple definitions, each one enacting what it defines as justice. If that vigilante, for example, isn't doing justice the way that I want to do it, I'll be a better vigilante. You more or less just like spread anarchy and like the justification for that anarchy like among society, which like brings us to the idea that individual biases, like compared to the state, a private person, like a state is always more measured. A state is actually always like more comfortable and more doing like evolving for that change. An individual is not. An individual does not have those checks. Ladies and gentlemen, in concluding, justice will not be just anymore. It will not happen anymore. Our own personal definitions of justice will permeate our own minds to a certain degree that we can actually not denigrate from. I beg you to oppose this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's great to be here today. We heard lots of blah 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 from first opposition about legitimacy and how this is going to make the state illegitimate, which I will rebut in all of my cases, but we haven't heard a single mechanism how they are going to solve the actual problems, right? As Dr. Dre very eloquently explained, people on the streets of LA hate the police, still popularly, still not loving police. That is what we're doing here, and that is what we're actually going to change in this problem, right? In this situation. So, what I'm going to explain some more about how the view of the police is so negative and how we can't actually change this model, which they don't do, and why the police can't operate in these areas. First of all, bring a few points of rebuttal, and if I have more time after that, I will bring more points. So, first of all, they say it's unclear what's the actual difference between the status quo. First of all, the use of non-violent, non-lethal weapons isn't legal in the status quo, at least not in the Netherlands, but let's assume it would be, right? The difference is that these groups are going to be organized right now, right? This organization makes them also directly accountable to the state, right? Just because the police has a certain amount, comparable to the police, they have a certain amount of legal authority to use non-lethal weapons, right? But they're still accountable into not abusing their power. We'll also explain how this will happen less. Next of all, they also get money to do this, and we will organize this by the state, right? So second of all, they ask us, why is this a policy that will work in the long run or only in the short run, right? Well, we say the motion explicitly states high crime areas. We believe that the moment that these high crime areas are actually stable, no high crime areas anymore, we don't need these vigilantes anymore. But then they say, yeah, but you can take away the narrative that is going to exist in society, that people can take retribution into their own hand, right? This idea is totally false, because these vigilantes are organized people which have a certain authority to use a limited amount of violence in order to prevent certain crimes, right? It never states that people are actually legal in our model to take measures into our own hand, right? We only use civilians organized in vigilante groups to take this measure into their own hand. And as they already explained, right, people want to feel retributed for the crime that has been done to them, especially in these high crime areas, right? So by doing this, people actually feel more retributed and are less likely to take measures into their own hand. And these, yes. So, third of all, and the last point of rebuttal, this abuse of power will simply not be in place, right? There are checks and balances in place to make sure these vigilantes don't cross borders when it comes to certain violent acts, right? Their job is to stop crimes, eventually arrest some form of criminals and bring them to the police, right? If they overstretch their border, like shooting tasers randomly at people on the street, right, they're still illegal and they're still held accountable, right? It's basically the same way that we hold the police accountable in the status quo. So that all doesn't fall, that all falls on our side of the house. So what's actually the main issue here, right? Because what they say is we should actually simply make the police better and make the police a better actor, right? But this, in this case, is simply something you cannot do, right? Because what we see is that people who are in high crime areas, they are often very skeptic of the police, right? For various reasons. First of all, maybe they're criminals themselves, they don't like police, right? Second of all, they see that the police is an inefficient actor, so they are naturally distrustful toward this police. This means, and third of all, these policemen are not from the actual community, right? Most of the policemen that are operating in a certain area live somewhere else, go safe to their home in their bed, and don't actually care about the neighborhood that is actually in place there. However, this might not even be true, but even if it isn't true, it is the narrative that is created for these kind of people, and that is why they hate the police, right? This leads to all sorts of negative things, right? We see, for example, happen in the Netherlands that in high crime areas, people are often very violent to the police. Even if these police just want to help these people are so skeptical of the police that they don't want the police to interfere into their own measures, right? These people are often also afraid of things that might be done to them by gang leaders and gang bosses and whatsoever, so they are afraid to talk to the police and that kind of stuff. We see that when a vigilante has this sort of role, this whole thing changes, turns around, right? If you talk to a vigilante that is actually from your own neighborhood, you say, I know that a certain gang boss has done this sort of thing and I want you to do about this, you have there's a much bigger chance that this person will actually listen to you and do something about it and not tell your secret, right? Because this person is from the community and knows that if what he knows is going to be known to the gang boss, you and the person that told you are going to hang, right? He can tell the authorities. So if you tell it to a policeman who goes safe to his home, he doesn't understand the kind of power mechanisms that are in place here, will tell on you, and you're screwed by the gang boss, right? And that is also a clear incentive why people are distrustful to tell these kind of things to the police in the first place. So, second of all.
Why can't these people who are embedded in the community be, as they are today, informants to the police and aid the police in any other way to gain the benefits you say without having the arms?
Yes, I understand what you're saying, but the moment that you don't have any kinds of legal protection or not any form of actual use of violence, right? In the status quo, if you are in a high crime area and you see a grandmother being robbed on the streets, what you basically can say is, well, either punching him in the face, which is a very bad idea. Second of all, what you can actually do is tell this person, hey, don't do that, which isn't such a great idea either, right? The moment that there are actual vigilantes in place here, it means that these vigilantes can grab their stun gun and do something about this, right? This is a whole different mechanism than what you are going to say here, that people from their own communities can solve crime in the first place, right? Another point which is kind of important is this will lead simply to less crime, right? We will have more vigilantes next to the police, so there's more people who can enforce the law in a certain kind of area. We believe that is very important, right? The idea that there are vigilantes in police which are actually in civilian clothes and are not out there on the streets with a badge and a gun, you know that the moment you're going to rob someone, you know that everyone might be a possible vigilante, right? This is not some kind of paranoid thing that we want in the general society. We believe that in a high crime area where people suffer much more from these very nasty crimes and this is actually causing distrust in the community, we believe that this is a legitimate thing to change this, to give them this kind of thing, to change this. So for all these reasons, because the legitimacy point is perfectly fine, because the view of the police is never going to be changed by the opposition, and because it leads to less crime, among other things, I beg you to propose. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, in representation of a small institution in the heart of Ireland called Ebony and Ivory, or Irony rather, I'm here proudly in opposition to a motion that I think they have not explained to us how it actually works, why it works. It responded to none of our clashes as to why, in the way this does any of the things that they aim to do long term, or in fact short term. So, we give you 3 points in furthering on this case. We tell you furthermore why, contrary to what they say, you don't have less crime in society, and I'll talk to you about why it is that we cede authority to the state and allow it to do things that we don't allow ordinary people to do, in the ways that it's more effective in doing that. We talk also about rehabilitation, and then finally very quickly touch on this idea of just increasing access and accessibility of violence in society to the individuals. Before that though, just a few quick points of rebuttal. So we tell you, like, First Prop are essentially advocating for a special wing of the police that are recruited exclusively from the locality and use non-lethal weapons. Like, we tell you that, like either A, status quo, or B, status quo, but like nicer people. I don't understand basically what that is. We think that's cool, that's entirely fine. We would think that it'd be better if the state apparatuses represented more of the people that they deal with. Maybe that would be a good idea. So we tell you to plunge some of your support into the existing state apparatus, and we get no response from that. We're not really sure what's happening. We think, though, the reality is, given the lack of clarity in the recruitment mechanism that we get from them, we can presume self-appointment with little to no scrutiny of who's involved, and little to no check on the authority, even though it tells us we'll just police them like we police the police, and make them police. Also, secondly, they hate the police. Or maybe people who feel distanced and distrustful of the judicial system's capacity to produce justice are not likely to long-term have faith or place necessary buy-in into that justice system when you tell them that if you don't like it and you don't think enough is happening, just go your own way and BYO weapons. Like, we don't think that that's a good idea. Like, also, in terms of they ask us, how do we fix this long-term? The bombing hills are falling apart. We say if we want to solve the core problem of the props of high crime in areas, maybe correct for the systematic disenfranchisement of the people who live in those areas. Maybe reach out, maybe more investment in those localities, maybe more investment in in local infrastructure, things like just nicer areas, more playgrounds, more play schools, more education programs, more welfare, maybe those things. Maybe also make the face of the state apparatus more recognizable to them. So it isn't so much like strange other white man coming in here and shooting down Trayvon Martin, but it's people who look like you, people from your locality, people who understand you, all the people that they want to push further away from the stage and empower them to do their own way and be in opposition to the state and deal with it themselves. Maybe instead absorbing them into the state apparatus might be a better way to long-term solve all of the things that they talk about. No, thank you. Right, so in terms of, first of all, why it is that we cede authority to the state and allow it to do things that we don't allow others. We tell you even things like things that are less to do with violence, apart from like monopoly on violence and on force. We also talk about things like monopoly on being able to tax people, being able to imprison people, all of the things that we think if you individually did it, that would probably let the stage. A couple of the reasons why we do. It is much harder to attach legitimacy. Like, it's already hard actually to attach legitimacy as it is. It is much harder when it's not something when it's not an actor we can broadly agree on and we've all broadly accepted. In at least democratic societies, we have broadly accepted the state and the individuals that compose of that state. So it is easier to say that society has done this to you as opposed to that individual has done it to you, and you have a right to question that in a way that means you have the right to either A, go against it, B, ignore it, or C, seek revenge on it. It is easier to attach the stamp of legitimacy when it's an actor who's carrying out something that we've all agreed on as necessary to do. Much more difficult when it's individuals who are self-appointed because they think they know best for the society, who maybe actually specifically don't like you because, like, newsflash, not everyone in these communities gets along, is homogenous. Like, actually there's an awful lot of dispute and distance within these. So we don't think you can presume that because you self-appoint yourself to an armed elite group, you necessarily represent or speak for that society or have the stamp of legitimacy from that society, right? We tell you also there's less bias, there's more plurality, there's less emotive and less irrational responses because the state can see long term in a way that individuals can't do because it has more access to information, both in terms of history, both in terms of more people speaking at the same time. Tell you less response in terms of the personal motivation for joining this sort of group is actually one that we can trace very specifically. You have seen something done to people you care about, you have seen something done to you personally, you actually have quite a personal bias against the sort of people in which you go for. That's the reason we tell you that you're likely to dissolve into more violence in a way that is just human. The reason that we can't quite get rid of the retributive aspect of the justice system is that that's the most human aspect of it all. That's the one that we naturally are inclined to go for. We want to hurt those who have hurt us. You're empowering those people to do that very thing, and you're empowering people who are not legitimized by the community at large to do that very thing. No, thank you. We also tell you that it seems more powerful, more capable of being able to do that thing. It seems more powerful, so I allow it to coerce me into taking my money that I've earned out of my pocket because it seems like if I don't, it'll do something to me, and I can conceptualize the idea of it being capable of doing that. Jesus. We tell you that individuals seem less powerful than the state entity, as it were. We tell you you're more likely to think that you can oppose individuals when they become the face of the justice system, the face of the policing system, because they are targetable, they're killable, they're weaker than the state because they're specific individuals that you can harm in very easy and accessible ways. So less deterrence and less fear. No, not quite yet, right? I speak really quickly at the time. Also, then we talk to you about rehabilitation, right? Because that is the long-term goal. We tell you that now when we understand that in these specific kinds of areas, it's often like high crime due to state failure, due to all the things that I talked about in my first rebuttal point, in recognizing that it's not just that it's necessary to rehabilitate people, which it is, it's also our obligation when the reason that they often turn to crime is our fault in the first place. I'll talk more about how that does not and can never happen, short-term or long-term, in the aftermath of this proposition, but first, very quickly, second.
It's lovely what you're saying and what we should do, but honestly, France is making this for years. They are
Okay,
sending the
you
best
cannot tell
teachers
me
there
that France
with
is
the same
investing
background.
everything that they could do in terms of reinvesting back into these societies, in terms of welfare programs, in terms of making sure that the state apparatus is representative of these groups. You cannot tell me that we've done enough as it is. If you do, like, feel free to spend 7 minutes rewriting history here for me. No, thank you. Right? In terms of rehabilitation, so what do you do when you've encouraged people to rationalize the systematic violence that we tell you will eventually occur? Because the only way you can say, if you decide that you accept what is done for you, you're told there's those vigilantes are protecting you, it's okay that they hurt that person, it's okay that they killed that person, the sort of rationalization that necessitates is like it's constituting the criminal as the other, the enemy as opposed to the victim of society. That sort of mindset never long-term feeds into you being willing to invest in their rehabilitation, feeds into you being willing to invest in, and also invest in yourself and change your mindset to make it more possible for them to reintegrate back into society. So short term, there's like not enough resources and not enough people giving a damn about rehabilitation. Long term, you've changed the sort of mindset in which these people operate, meaning they're not willing to invest in rehabilitation. So because we tell you this doesn't work, because we think the police force they recommend would be a nice idea, and for all of those reasons, we beg you to propose.
After I've done some rebuttal on what we heard so far, is talk about two things. First of all, I want to talk about a very simple thing, that is the mechanism of how we will actually manage to establish security, which is the first step towards making those communities, making those neighborhoods safe and better places to live in again. And second of all, I'm going to talk about statehood and the failure of the state in all different kinds of cases that exist. And I'm not only going to talk about the banlieues in Paris, I'm also going to talk about certain areas in the United States, in Detroit, in New York. I'm also going to talk about other areas where you might have such armed vigilantes where the state not only just lost statehood and control that it once had, but where the state never actually had any control, like for instance Brazil in the favelas. So in all those cases, it will be a good thing if the state does that, supports them in the way that the first government has said, but just giving them certain tools that are not weapons. But for the second opposition and for opposition in the whole, we will also talk about the even if case, because we think all the things we will talk, I will say in my speech, apply and still work even if you give them weapons, or like in the United States where people can just arm themselves, you just allow it for them to have those weapons and use them in vigilante groups. First of all, a little bit of rebuttal. Now, please mark that there is no alternative so far from the opposition. The easy way out they take is they say, we will just give them much more education. You know, you will have to change the whole system of France, the way that the French see themselves, the way that the French have used their educational system to change education and make anything better for the people that live in the suburbs. So it's not an easy way out. We have tried this, it's not working. We actually have an alternative that is working with what we have here. Then they have a lot of concerns, which we understand. They say, what about checks? What about balances? What about people who start feeling that they can take the law into their own hands? What about people who start losing, you know, their understanding of if you're legitimate to do something? What about people who start acting against other, I don't know, ethnic groups in the neighborhood when they become armed vigilantes? Well, we have one example, that is the United States, where people can already arm themselves. And we don't see the United States kind of deteriorating, you know, the citizens thinking they can, no bashing of the United States, please. I study American literature, so one for one. So that's already not happening They still respect the laws, and the problems are different with violence in those countries. It's just not happening at the moment. An additional thing that we see, it's about the motivation. The people that decide to become vigilantes and organize themselves, be it with weapons, like the first government is saying, or even if they have weapons, is a different one than from the gangs you're talking about. The motivation of those vigilantes is they want to stop this violence. They want to have a better neighborhood for their children. They don't want their sons to become crack dealers. They don't want their sons to be the next 50 Cent. Maybe that, but not really. So this is what they want. Their motivation is to make their neighborhoods better and not deal in crack or earn money by being a drug dealer or exploiting your neighborhood. That's why we believe this internal motivation is a check and a balance enough for those people not to start misusing the power that they have. And we've also been given enough, we think, checks and balances also from the government. Before I go on, first.
Okay, so first Prop tell us that the politicians and the police are not invested in doing anything about these communities, which is why we have to empower those individuals to do it themselves. But you tell us we've already done everything we possibly could. That tension seems to me a little apparent. Can you explain that?
It's not really a tension, because I told you if you would have to do what you want to do, we would have to change the whole system, and you say we just haven't done enough, and we say we've done as much as we can given that the system that exists. That's what's just happening, you know? It's just not working so far. So let me talk about the mechanism and the security that we think is going to happen, because we think that's still something that is open in this debate. Security, just security, you know? Not having violence on the street, not having shootdowns on the corner, not having people being robbed, not having shops being robbed, people being stabbed down on the street in the night, in the daylight. So just taking that away, or making that less on the streets, in the everyday life, all the people that live in those hoods, or all the people that live in those areas, will be a first step. How do we achieve that? By manpower. We just have more people on the streets, on the corner, on the ground. Whether they have, I don't know, some kind of a bat like from First Government, or whether they have an actual gun, the thing that we're changing is more people that are organized on the street with the aim to actually protect the citizens in this area, with the aim to look out for criminals who maybe are using guns to report them to the police or go after them with their own gun. This is the one thing that we're changing that is different than the status quo. Because the reason those gangs can establish themselves, the reason those areas can become high crime areas, is the absence of the state in the first place. And there are different ways how that happens, which leads me, or is connected to my second point, with the failure of the state. Thank you very much. So in the Paris suburbs that we talked about so far, we have the case where you have well, a minority of French people that, you know, have been pushed out of society because of discrimination and because of lack of integration in giving them their rights. In cases, for instance, like United States cities or neighborhoods, you have cities that just have become relatively poor, and you have become, they don't have enough money to maybe invest in enough policemen and educating and, I don't know, training enough policemen, and that's how an area opened up for gangs to be able to be violent, just because there was no one to stop them. They didn't really have such sophisticated organizations of, you know, weapons and how they organize and how they rob you and so on and so forth. It's a very easy way they do it. The reason they can do it is because there was no one from the state authority to stop them. This is the one thing that we're changing by putting people on the ground that have the motivation and the task to be there and to look out for that and to actually stop that. And it's the same for the favelas, for instance, in Brazil. The only difference there is that the state never actually managed to get in there with the police. Although they tried, they have just been pushed out. And in all those cases, we say that the state has failed one of the most basic tasks it has for its citizens. And that is guaranteeing the security of your bodily integrity, that you're not being stabbed, that you're not being robbed, that you're not being killed. And we say, when the state, for all those different reasons, in all those different cases, there are different reasons why the state is not doing that anymore. The one thing that the state must do and can do in this case is work with what it has to actually take a step further, or to take a step towards reestablishing itself as a state and as the authority in those areas. By, for instance, working with those people, establishing security so that the police can come in, or actually establishing vigilante groups that the police can work with once they, you know, manage to work there and be established. So in all those cases, it's a first good step for the state to actually come back in and guarantee security, so that everything else that builds on that can come back to the citizens that live there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, speakers for your words. I call on the member of the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, what you just had from the government bench was a particularly dystopic, craven policy of something very similar to the status quo, but sometimes they want to talk about things like guns, but they don't really know what to use it for. In fact, what I'm going to give you today is I'm going to examine the problem that we have, because we're going to agree that high crime rate areas do need more police force, and they are inadequately taken care of by the state. But to make communities safer is not through arming civilians in that community, but in fact investing in the social capital within that community. Second, I'm going to talk about how this policy, in fact, is ineffectual because vigilantes, the different types of vigilantes, not just the characterization that closing government was relying on, are particularly have certain characteristics that make them unable to police these communities as much as good as a police force. And thirdly, I'm going to talk about how this affects the police. But first, a couple of rebuttals, right? So, according to things. So, the biggest problem, I think, with the government bench is that none of the benefits they provided, such as embedded knowledge within the community, such as manpower from closing government, such as, for example, making citizen arrest when they see a criminal, none of those benefits are mutually exclusive to their policy. We can have all those benefits even if we don't arm these civilians, even if we don't create vigilante groups. So that's problematic, and this severely disadvantaged both the case of opening government and closing government, right? Because those benefits we like, and we can do that in the status quo without having your policy. Second rebuttal, Madam Speaker, is that in fact we think that by arming these vigilantes, presumably who are within communities, we think that it's problematic because if the state supports these vigilantes, you can have two effects, right? As what Mati correctly pointed out to me, whispering in my ear. One is that once you legitimize them with a deputization by the state, the communities, presumably they hate the police, might be hated by the communities as well. So you can create a fractious community where they no longer trust these individuals. So how effective will they be in aiding the police and the state in tracking down criminals when they're shut off from these secret embedded networks that supposedly they have access to? Right? Secondly, we think that it's problematic because even if they're not hated by the community, you can create internal conflict within that community. So a vigilante that arrests your cousin will have family within that community, and you can pick families and friends and networks within that community, creating a more fractious community, which contravenes the general goal of the state. Because we think what really generates safety, trust, and security in communities is not more guns, it's not more police, it's increasing the cooperative network between those people who live there. They watch their neighborhoods together, they watch their children, they do something when a crime is perpetrated rather than not helping them at all. Those things can only happen when that community cooperates with each other. But your policy incentivizes them from internal conflict within that community, and that's problematic even under your model. No thanks, wait for my arguments. Right, so the first bit, let's examine the problem, right? So yes, the problem is that our police is undermanned. It has no, often their technology is very antiquated. They are underpaid, so there's very little that they can do, particularly for high crime rate areas and has such a high volume of crimes, right? So they often make those people in those communities are unsafe, and they often feel frustrated at the situation. We completely agree, and we've got to do something about it, right? But the way we do something about it is not just what opening opposition already talked about, which is investing that community, but a particular kind of of investment, right? Because we think that the way you make neighborhoods safe is to encourage them to invest in their ability to, in fact, spend time together, to build infrastructure that they can get together in the local community, YMCA, for example, where they get to know each other and they have activities together. You allow them to invest in the security of each other, and we think that is a far better daily infrastructure that makes them safer than any sort of police force or vigilante that you may create. But before that, yes?
Yes. Our vigilantes have less authority. They are civilians. They use non-lethal weapons. They are selected from the community and they organize themselves. How is that the same as the police?
No, I never said that they were the same as the police, but the benefits that you say are also within our framework. We don't need to arm them. Please listen. Right. So we think there are two good examples of making communities safe. We think that, for example, like Robert Putnam talks about this southern Roman, southern Italian neighborhood where they're extremely poor, but they have a ridiculously low crime rate. It's because they have lots of sort of dance halls and bowling alleys where the communities regularly meet each other. So that even if the police force, like the Italian police force, isn't exactly the best in the world, even if the police force can't really reach them, they don't need that police force anymore or any vigilantes, because the state has built the infrastructure by which people can generate social capital to keep each other safe. We think that's the way to do it, and that's what you have to examine. We don't need your policy. Second thing, Mr. Speaker, is we think that this is problematic because, first of all, the problem with closing government's case is that they relied on one characterization of vigilantes, right? They said that they're often like personally invested and that they have personal motivation. One, that's problematic, is because that can compromise what should have been evidence-driven arrests and evidence-driven like action. Second, Mr. Speaker, is that that's problematic because there are different types of vigilantes, right? There's the Steven Seagals of this world who delivers like movie lines from his movie whenever he makes citizen arrest, which is like, and there's like the things that, like the type that opinion government talked about. There's a masculine, macho culture from different people who may be very rough on individuals, and we think that might scare other individuals, particularly when they're less legitimized by the law. Second, thirdly, there are vigilantes who actually rely on the financial rewards that they get by apprehending individuals. That creates perverse incentives, right? Because the more you capture, the more you gain from financially. We think that might lead individuals from taking shortcuts at really sort of looking at the due process in arresting individuals. And we think that's extremely problematic. And this will compromise what would have been a really good sort of like a system of apprehending criminals. For all those reasons, I am proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank you for your words and call on the government for this.
Originally, the most important task of the state was always the same: provide security to its people. That was the basic fundament of every state that was created. The idea that the state can provide security to its people. The state in these areas failed. It cannot provide the security anymore, otherwise they wouldn't be high crime areas. Therefore, we believe we have to take unusual measures. We see your problem. Of course, we would have preferred a system like in Sweden where everything is fluffy. And we would have preferred everywhere nice schools that have 3 toilets, 4 toilets, 7 toilets. It would have been amazing if we could have done all this in the suburbs of Detroit, in the favelas in Brazil, or in the banlieues of Paris. And yeah, we should try it. We should give them all the bathrooms in the world. We should give them all the playgrounds in the world. And we should give them all the support investment-wise that we have. We should give them the best education there is. And Yeah, we should all do that, but we don't see that it's actually mutually exclusive to what we are doing. We are for education as well, honestly. We give them everything you're giving them, plus we give them the vigilante groups. Thank you for your time. The idea is that we already did this. We did this 30 years in France. When we're talking about France, the best educated teachers usually go the first 5 years to the banlieues. That is a fact. The best teachers go there, and it's a huge idea, and it really helps your career to go there. The best teachers go there, and they usually tend to take those with the same background. They are doing all that what you want to do. They are using the police force there, but they still get kicked out. Why is that, and what can we do about it? We think that we have two debates in this one debate, two clashes. The first debate is that all the three groups here made, basically, is the idea vigilante groups are better than the police in that particular case. We are making an extension saying that's not just the most important point, we are saying as well vigilante groups are better than gangs and those who are actually taking control there. And we are saying we are making a first step to break this limited statehood we have over there. And this limited statehood has to end. We are not talking about fluffy suburbs in Stockholm where sometimes burns a car. We are talking about no-go areas for police. This is the reason. This is the things we are talking about. And this is existent in Detroit. This is existent in Paris, and this is existent in favelas. The state has no power there anymore. But let's talk firstly about the first debate. I think we have two good ideas here. We have the idea that it is incredibly important to have the rule of law. The idea that we have a higher thing that is responsible, that we can actually take accountable for its actions. And we think that is incredibly important. We think that is incredibly important, and we would do this nowhere else but in high crime areas. We'd say this is an unconventional measure, and usually it shouldn't be the case that actually individuals take the power into their hand. We accept that it is sometimes arbitrary, and that we have cases like Zimmerman, where we see that actually this force is used for bad purposes. We see all those problems. And we see the problems that the cousin is arrested and it will cause distress in those areas. All this is true, but the alternative is that the cousin kills another cousin or kills someone who's owning a shop, or is bribing people, or is forcing people into prostitution, or is selling drugs. All those are the alternative for your cousin that got arrested. It's not that this cousin was a nice guy. He was arrested. He probably did something severe. And it's not just that he was had a parking ticket or something. It's serious things we're talking about. So, why are vigilante groups probably or possibly better than the police? We have the reasons there that we could actually structure them. They have better know-how. We have more manpower. We told you all this. And with the police, we see that they have a stigma, and that's a fact in those areas, because part of those areas, people are illegally there. They sometimes had trouble either with the police or with the state as a higher actor. All those things are true. Being a policeman is not a badge of honor in those areas. It's a badge of shame. It's if you wear the uniform, you are not part of the community anymore. And we see this as a problem. And therefore, maybe vigilante groups are a better actor, even if we say that sometimes they are doing wrong things. This is what first government told you. They had lots of nice things like teasers and cameras and stuff like that. We will apply all that, and we think we will give the money and our support to the best groups that are there, the most secure groups where we think that actually we will have the least harm. But before that, I'll take closing.
Yeah, what you have to answer is you have to provide a causal mechanism by which your policy is mutually exclusive to the benefits that you desire. But we've already said that we can have that under our model as well.
I don't have to explain why my proposal is mutually exclusive to my benefits. That's nonsense. So I have to explain why our mechanism works, and this is what I'm going to do right now. We have in those areas gangs. We have those gangs, and they are the leading part. Sometimes it's one gang, sometimes it's two gangs that are fighting and having a turf war. Those are basically the alternatives. Sometimes you have three gangs. Sometimes you have three gangs, and all this happens there. We are now building an alternative. The gangs there are funded basically by prostitution, human trafficking, and drug deals. This is usually where they get their money. We are saying we give you a second alternative. Please sit down. We are giving you a second alternative, and this is actually an institution that has not the aim to make the most money, but to create a secure environment. To create a secure environment, yes, for investors, yeah, for their children. There are human beings as well living there who just like to live safely. And we provide them the idea. And we won't give the money and our support to the best people who come there, and we won't give it to any gangs. We will try to do it the smart way. This is not always easy, and we will make mistakes. We are aware of that. But the alternative is doing nothing. And doing nothing didn't really help us that much in the last couple of decades. We see that the vigilante groups have actually the incentive to provide security. So we think most of them do have this. And this security might be a first step into state. Might be a first step if we're talking about the favelas. We have these big raids, and that remarkably went well for half a year, 9 months. The gangs are back again in those favelas. That might be news for you, but the alternative are basically raids that you are having there, and you're kicking them out, and they will come back again, because that's actually the idea that you had. We are proposing an organic change in these areas, where we are saying, step by step, we will create more statehood, more stability, by giving alternatives to the gang. It's not really about Dr. Dre or 50 Cent, it's more about Tupac. You die. It's about dying. Persecuting these people over there. Nobody is actually looking for them, even though we have lots of police force there. We are saying, let's give them an alternative. Let's give them an alternative in the favelas. Let's give them an alternative in the banlieues, where we have step by step, maybe an alternative for a future, an alternative future where we get step by step back to state. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the government.
Ladies and gentlemen, the burden of the government was clear from the start. They needed to prove that it is effective to support armed vigilante groups to reduce crimes with acceptable consequences. In my speech today, I will provide you with the reasons why this has not been proven by the government using 3 main points. Now, the first one is the comparison between the police and the vigilantes and their effectiveness. The second one is the effect on the community that's there, the fragmentation of society and the effect on the vigilantes. And thirdly, the unfavorable mechanism which they have been promoting through the entire case, which is completely illogical in what they're trying to do. But first, on some cases of rebuttal. Now, continuing with the last statement I made, your opening government claimed that they would support non-lethal weapons. Against what? Lethal weapons? I mean, they are the dangerous criminals we have. It's the highest form of sort of the high criminal areas, and you want to give them tasers to deal with machine guns. No, thank you, sir. No, thank you, sir. I mean, and then on continuing on this sort of, you're supposed to lose this PY that you don't have to prove that our cases are mutually exclusive. That's completely exactly what we have to do. What we claim on this side, no thank you sir, on this side, is that the model which has been presented by the government, all the goals which they have said they can achieve, we can achieve currently under status quo with normal informants. No thank you. Now, and so you exactly need to prove that you can achieve some goals which we cannot, and you have not done that. Now, the last one is this thing about social infrastructure. No thank you, sit down. Social infrastructure and the community, where you claim that it's expensive to build social capital. The most cheap thing to do in a system is to have a community center and arrange a dance. People come, they want to dance, they want to entertain themselves. No, thank you, sir. And they come, they enjoy themselves. They build a safer community within themselves where they trust each other. How is this expensive? How can you claim that we don't have the resources to support this? So, I mean, this point simply doesn't stand. Now, to summarize the case for the opposition, bench, I'm going to start with this difference between the police and the vigilantes. We have consistently claimed here that there's a lack of training to support state goals within vigilantes. Because what these people on this bench seem to believe is that everyone in these communities will have, no thank you, will have the exact same goal as state and the same system of justice and the same belief of actions as the state, which is not the case. These are people with personal involvement in every case, in their actions, without the training to support No, sit down. To support the legal system and to understand it fully without the rigorous training of our law enforcement officers. And that is why simply your model simply does not solve any of these reduction of crime problems which you are claiming to do. No, thank you. Now, secondly, is the effect on the community, and this is an expansion on Lucy's argument about social capital. That what is it that really promotes a safe and secure system where people trust each other, where sort of crime is reduced and they have a nice neighborhood? It is that people like each other. Let me finish this argument. It is that people like each other. And the building on the social capital, in the way that Lucy wants to do it, and the way I said before, on the dam, is exactly what we're doing here. And you are claiming that that wasn't possible. Now, and the continuation of that is this importance.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll take it. No, I'll take the clothing.
Thank you very much. We agree that the problem is the absence of policemen. You say policemen have all the benefits that vigilantes have, but not the harms. But the problem is that we don't have policemen and they cannot get in for the various reasons. How is your mechanism working? The problem is that they're not there and they cannot get in. So
I get your point. You've had 15 seconds. First of all, we explained to you on this case of the reasoning you say that the police is not getting in is because they have the support of the state and the people there don't support the state. Lucy used my argument, which I presented, was that if you get the support of the state for the vigilante groups, what does that exactly entail? It entails that these people are the force of the state and will be equally as inefficient to work with a non-state trusting community as the police. That is no, thank you. That is exactly what the consequence of this is. Now, moving on to the sort of last point that we want to make here about the extreme problematic within your system, where you are fracturing families, where you are fracturing the community, no thank you, and creating a tension within the system that will promote more crime. Now, what happens in the cases that we used the example of the cousin before? First of all, your claim that nobody will arrest someone else's cousin based, no thank you. That nobody will arrest someone else's cousin, no thank you. Sit down! Nobody will support each other, try to arrest each other's cousin based on personal belief. I mean, these are not rigorously trained officers. That's the definition of a vigilante. They have the personal goals consistently going, and they might make this mistake of trying to arrest somebody. Sure, they might not get prosecuted, but that still fractures the community in it. Families will stop trusting each other. They will stop relying on each other for support. And more people in need, no thank you, more people when they land in need and the community begins to sort of defragilize, will be turned into victims for crime. So, to sum up exactly what I've shown you here related to the burden. Now, the burden, as I said, was to show that there's reduction of crime with acceptable consequences. We have proven that the model produced by them does not produce crime, because in the first speech we talked about non-lethal weapons versus lethal weapons is completely ridiculous. Secondly, is that this actually seeds into the system and creates an affinity to violence proved very efficiently by the opening government, opposition, and how it defragilizes the communities and the trust towards each other, which is potentially the last thing they have to remain from, and how the inefficiency of your system by promoting the people who are not supposed to be tied to the state, and that would make them efficient, and then tying them up to the state, how this really does dissolve their entire goal. And for all these reasons, we beg you to vote side opposition. Thank you so much.